This is the lecture video for the carbon cycle content page. Now, when we learn about the carbon cycle, we are tracking how carbon can exist in different places on our planet. Now, the thing that you have to remember, it's just like the hydrologic cycle, the water cycle, where the amount of carbon on our planet is fixed. We don't ever get any new carbon, and we don't ever really lose the carbon. Maybe if a meteor hits, it might bring a tiny little bit of carbon, but overall, we never get more carbon and it never actually goes away. It just transfers from state to state. Let me show you what that means. This diagram is pretty good. It shows you that carbon exists as carbon dioxide, it exists as carbon in plants. Decomposers break it down and re-release it to the atmosphere. There's all kinds of different places that carbon can go, but what you have to realize is that in each of these different places, carbon takes on a different form. And what I mean by that is that some of the processes, like respiration or photosynthesis or combustion, these transform the carbon from one form to another. What they're really doing is that they're breaking the bonds that the carbon has with other elements and reforming bonds with other stuff to make a new molecule. It's the same carbon, but it's taking on a different form. Let me try to show you what that means. Everyone's pretty familiar with photosynthesis, and we know that plants, they take in water and CO2 and they use the sun to make energy for themselves and oxygen. Now let's look at exactly what that looks like. A little tiny bit of chemistry, but it's actually very easy if you just focus a little bit. So plants are going to suck up water, H2O, in their roots. You know what that is. That's a plus sign. So they take H2O plus they pull in through their leaves CO2. Now, what they make is called glucose. That's like sugar for themselves. Glucose has the formula C6H12O6. And as a byproduct, they release oxygen. They'll use the glucose and they will release the oxygen as a waste product. Now, this is a chemical equation here. You're pretty familiar with H2O. That means there's two H's and one O. CO2 means there's one C and two O's. C6H12O6, glucose, means that there's 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens, and O2 is just 2 oxygens. Now, what you'll notice here, though, is that when a plant takes in H2O and CO2, there's actually not enough of these elements to make C6H12O6. So if they pulled up in their roots H2O, they only get 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Well, there's 12 hydrogens over here. So what you do in chemistry class is you balance the equation. I'll just do it really quick. You'll learn about this later. But I'll show you what this means. That means in order for a plant to make just this one glucose molecule, it has to take in 6 water molecules and 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. You can kind of think of this as like a math problem. When you put the numbers in front of that molecule or that atom, well, we had H2O, that's 2 H's and an O, but we have 6 of those. So 2 H's, but we have 6 of them. So in this side, we have 12 hydrogens, and we have 6 oxygens. Here, carbon, well, we have 6 CO2s as a whole. So that means that there's 6 carbons, and then 2 oxygens for every one. That's 6 times 2 is 12 oxygens. If we look on this side, we obviously have 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens, and then we have 12 oxygens, right? O2 6 times, 2 oxygens 6 whole times is 12. If you look, that may have been kind of complicated, but what really happens is this carbon in the form of CO2 that's taken in, the plant can't use it. So it's going to transform it by breaking the bonds of CO2 and remaking bonds with other things to make this glucose, which it can use. It becomes part of its plant parts. And if you look, well, in order to make this C6H12O6, they needed 12 H's. They got the 12 H's right here. They needed 6 O's. They got them right here. And they needed 6 carbons. Boom, here. Now what you'll notice is that when they broke all these bonds and got just the elements, they were left with these 12 O's. And if you look at this side of the equation, the plant made glucose, and it also made 12 O's, which this is a waste product it will release, which is why we get oxygen. Now, the reason I said this is because as you look at the carbon cycle, remember that carbon, the C, which is carbon, that never is created or destroyed on this planet. It just converted from one form to another. Now, plants do this with photosynthesis. They take in a bunch of water, a bunch of CO2. They use the power of the sun to break the bonds of these molecules and rearrange them to make what they want, which is glucose, and they get rid of the other stuff that they don't want. So the carbon that they took in the form of CO2 was all used. They just transformed it into a different molecule. Now we do that too. Have you ever eaten a plant? If you eat a plant, you're actually eating this and some other trace elements like nitrogen. But what you'll notice is that in a human, I'll move over here, our body is mostly, well, it's made up of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Now, if you look, the proteins have carbon in them, the carbohydrates have a lot of carbon in them, and the fats have a lot of carbon in them. So when we eat food, sometimes if we eat it from an animal, we can literally get these fats. But what our body does is it breaks them down into all of just the elements, the C's, the O's, the H's, all of that. And it will put them back together in a different form that we need. However, all of these elements, it's all the same stuff we ate. We just break the bonds and make new bonds. So when you're learning about the carbon cycle and it says that carbon moves through different places, all it means is that carbon can exist as a gas, as a solid, and what's different about them is that different processes can break the bonds, for example, of the CO2 here, and turn it into something else, as long as they have enough energy. If you need help, call me over, and you can rewatch this video. But essentially, all I'm saying is that the carbon that we have on Earth is the same amount of carbon there has been since the formation of the Earth. It just changes what bonds it has with other stuff, and that allows it to exist in different states on the planet. CO2 in the atmosphere, glucose in plants, etc.